The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as I was hauling groceries from my car into my house in Fairmont Hills, Arizona. And I felt my stomach drop when I recognized the HOA's return address stamped on the envelope. My name is Quincy Karlson, and I had lived in this planned community outside Phoenix for 3 years without a single problem, or so I thought. I set the bags down on my kitchen counter and tore open the envelope with a growing sense of dread. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 for improper placement of my backup generator, which apparently violated Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines regarding unsightly external equipment placement. I read the words twice, then 3 times, my confusion mounting with each pass. The generator sat on a concrete pad on the side of my house, exactly where the electrician who installed it said would be best for ventilation and code compliance. It was painted to match my house, surrounded by decorative rocks and barely visible from the street. I grabbed my phone and called the HOA office immediately. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Fairmont Hills Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking. How may I assist you today? Yes, this is Quincy Karlson from 4782 Desert Vista Drive. I just received a fine for my generator placement, and I need to understand what the issue is. The generator was professionally installed and meets all the local codes. One moment, please. The hold music was some tinny instrumental version of a pop song I could not quite place. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, a different voice came on the line. Mr. Karlson, this is Deborah Thompson, HOA president. I reviewed your property file personally. Your generator is visible from Mrs. Patterson's property next door, and she filed a complaint. According to our guidelines, all mechanical equipment must be completely screened from view of neighboring properties. Screened from view. The guidelines I received when I moved in said equipment needed to be placed in side or rear yards and painted to match the home, which is exactly what I did. The guidelines were updated last year at our annual meeting. All homeowners were notified. I pulled up my email and searched for any communication from the HOA. Nothing about updated guidelines appeared. I never received any notification about updated guidelines. That is not our problem, Mr. Karlson. The fine stands. You have 30 days to relocate the generator and screen it properly, or additional fines will accrue at $200 per week. My hands were shaking as I ended the call. $200 per week. That was insane. I walked outside to look at the generator again, trying to see what could possibly be so offensive about it. The unit was maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, painted a sandy beige that matched my stucco perfectly. I walked over to the fence line between my property and Mrs. Patterson's house. From her yard, you could barely see a corner of the generator if you stood in one specific spot and craned your neck. Mrs. Patterson was a 70-something widow who had always seemed pleasant enough, waving when we saw each other at the mailbox. I decided to talk to her directly. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. I walked around the block to her front door and rang the bell. She answered after a moment, her face lighting up with recognition. Quincy, what a nice surprise. Hi, Mrs. Patterson. I hope I am not bothering you, but I received a letter from the HOA about my generator. They said you filed a complaint. Her expression shifted immediately, becoming guarded. Oh, well, I mentioned to Deborah that I could see it from my kitchen window. I did not realize they would fine you. But you can barely see it, and it is painted to match my house. Did it bother you that much? She looked uncomfortable, glancing back into her house. Deborah came by last month for our monthly tea. She pointed it out and said it was against the rules. She said I should report it. I am sorry, dear. I did not mean to cause trouble. That was when I realized what was happening. Deborah Thompson was not enforcing legitimate rules. She was going on fishing expeditions, looking for violations to justify her position. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and walked back home, my mind racing. Over the next week, I dove deep into the HOA documents. I found the original guidelines from when I purchased my home, and I found the meeting minutes from the past 5 years. There was no record of any vote to update the equipment screening requirements. The annual meeting minutes from the previous year mentioned nothing about guideline changes at all. In fact, attendance at that meeting had been sparse, with only 12 homeowners showing up out of the 247 properties in Fairmont Hills. I drafted a formal appeal letter, citing the specific guideline version I had followed and noting the lack of proper notification about any changes. I included photos showing how minimal the visual impact of the generator was, and attached the original installation permit from the county. I sent it certified mail to the HOA office and waited. The response came 10 days later. Appeal denied. The fine stood, and I now had 20 days remaining to comply. I was not the type to give up easily. My background in project management had taught me to document everything and follow proper channels. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which according to the community website was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building I had only been inside once during my initial property tour. I arrived 15 minutes early and found maybe 8 other homeowners scattered among the rows of folding chairs. The board sat at a table in the front, Deborah Thompson in the center, flanked by 2 other board members whose names I did not know. Deborah was exactly what I expected. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a severe blonde bob and reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, and everything about her posture screamed self-importance. The meeting started promptly at 7. Deborah called it to order and launched into a long-winded discussion about landscaping standards and the upcoming pool resurfacing project. 20 minutes in, she asked if there was any new business. I raised my hand. I would like to discuss my fine for generator placement. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Violation disputes are not appropriate for general board meetings. You needed to file a formal appeal. I did file an appeal. It was denied without any explanation. The explanation is simple, Mr. Karlson. You violated the community guidelines. The board voted to uphold the fine. What vote? There are 3 board members here. Did you all review my appeal documents? Did you see the photos? Did you verify whether the guideline update you are citing was properly approved? One of the other board members, a balding man in his 60s, shifted uncomfortably. Deborah handles most of the day-to-day enforcement decisions. So there was no vote. Deborah's face flushed. This is not the time or place for this discussion, Mr. Karlson. Your fine stands. If you refuse to pay, we will place a lien on your property. I would like to see the documentation showing when and how the guidelines were updated. According to Arizona law, HOA guideline changes require a majority vote of the membership, not just the board. The meeting minutes from last year show no such vote. Are you calling me a liar? Deborah's voice rose sharply. I am asking for documentation. The meeting devolved from there. Deborah refused to provide any additional information and moved on to other business. I stayed for the remainder of the meeting, noting how she dominated every discussion and how the other board members rarely spoke. Afterward, the balding man approached me in the parking lot. Bob Martinez, he said, extending his hand. I am sorry about what happened in there. Deborah can be difficult. She is making up rules. Bob glanced around nervously. Look, I should not be telling you this, but you are right. There was no proper vote on those guideline updates. Deborah just started enforcing them. I tried to push back, but she threatened to sue me personally for not fulfilling my board duties. I am retiring next year and I cannot afford legal problems. Why do not the other homeowners vote her out? Most people do not pay attention until they get hit with a fine. By then, they just pay it and move on. You are the first person I have seen actually fight back. Bob's words stuck with me. A system only works when people participate, and Deborah had built her little fiefdom on apathy. I spent the weekend researching Arizona HOA law. I found a statute that required HOAs to file their governing documents with the county recorder's office, including any amendments. I drove to the Maricopa County Recorder's office the following Monday and requested all documents filed by the Fairmont Hills HOA. The clerk printed them out for a small fee, and I sat in my car reading through them. There it was, in black and white. The most recent amendment filed was from 4 years ago and had nothing to do with generator placement. The guidelines Deborah claimed were updated last year had never been properly adopted or filed. I had my smoking gun, but I needed to be strategic about how to use it. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Patricia Chambers, and she had good reviews online. We met at her office in Scottsdale the next day. Patricia was in her 40s, sharply dressed, and immediately struck me as someone who did not suffer fools. I laid out the entire situation for her, showing her all my documentation. "This is actually more common than you would think," she said after reviewing everything. "Power-hungry board presidents who forget they are not dictators. The good news is you have an excellent case. The bad news is fighting it could cost you several $1,000s in legal fees." What are my options? Option 1, pay the fine and move the generator. Option 2, we file a lawsuit against the HOA for improper enforcement and abuse of authority. Option 3, we do something more creative. I am listening. She leaned back in her chair. You file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOA compliance with state law. If they investigate and find violations, they can impose penalties on the board members personally. That usually gets their attention fast. How long does that take? Could be weeks, could be months. But in the meantime, we can also request an injunction preventing them from enforcing the fine or placing a lien on your property. That is faster, usually just a few days. I decided to pursue both options. Patricia filed the complaint with the state and drafted the injunction request. The filing fees and initial legal costs ran me $1,500, but it was worth it on principle. The injunction hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Deborah showed up with the HOA's lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. The judge heard both sides for about 30 minutes. Patricia was brilliant. She methodically laid out how the HOA had failed to properly adopt the guidelines they were enforcing, how I had received no proper notice, and how the fine was arbitrary and capricious. Deborah's lawyer tried to argue that the board had broad discretion, but he had no documentation to back up their position. The judge granted the injunction, preventing the HOA from collecting the fine or placing a lien pending the outcome of the state investigation. As we left the courthouse, Deborah shot me a look of pure hatred. "You are going to regret this," she hissed. "Is that a threat?" Patricia asked sharply. Deborah's lawyer grabbed her arm and pulled her away before she could respond. I thought that would be the end of it for a while, but 2 days later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one cited me for having my garbage cans visible from the street. I had put them out the night before trash pickup, exactly like every other house in the neighborhood. I took photos of 6 other houses on my street with their cans out and sent them to Patricia. "Retaliation," she said immediately. "This actually strengthens our case. Do not pay this fine either." The harassment continued. Over the next month, I received citations for my lawn being a quarter-inch too long, for leaving my car parked in my driveway overnight, and for having a garden hose visible from the side yard. Each citation was more ridiculous than the last. I documented everything. Meanwhile, the state investigation was moving forward. An investigator contacted me for an interview, and I provided copies of all my documentation. He seemed particularly interested in the bogus fines I had received after filing my complaint. Then something unexpected happened. I received a call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Mr. Karlson, this is Sarah Chen from 4891 Desert Vista. I heard what you are going through with the HOA. Something similar happened to me last year. What kind of situation?" Deborah fined me for painting my front door the wrong shade of beige. I had gotten approval from the architectural committee first, but she overruled them. I ended up paying $2,000 in fines because I could not afford a lawyer. "Did you keep any documentation?" "Everything." "I would like to help if I can." Over the next few days, 3 more homeowners contacted me. Each had a story of unreasonable fines and arbitrary enforcement. One man, Richard Lee, had been fined for installing solar panels even though there was a state law protecting homeowners' rights to solar installations. He had paid $5,000 to avoid a lien on his property. I organized a meeting at a coffee shop in nearby Scottsdale, neutral territory away from the HOA's reach. 7 homeowners showed up and we compared notes. A pattern emerged. Deborah had been systematically targeting homeowners who made improvements to their properties, finding or inventing violations and collecting fines. The HOA's management company was complicit, rubber stamping whatever she wanted. "Why do you think she is doing this?" Sarah asked. Richard, who worked in accounting, had an interesting theory. "I think she is embezzling. These fines go into the HOA general fund, right? But who audits that? If she has control of the accounts, she could be skimming." That had not occurred to me, but it made sense. I called Patricia and asked if we could look into the HOA's financial records. "Homeowners have a right to review the HOA's financial documents," she said. "Draft a formal request. They have to comply within 10 business days under Arizona law." I sent the request that afternoon via certified mail. When the deadline passed with no response, Patricia filed a motion to compel. The judge was not happy with the HOA's non-compliance and ordered them to produce all financial records within 5 days or face contempt charges. The documents arrived via a delivery service on the 5th day. There were boxes of them, bank statements, invoices, receipts, everything. I spread them out on my dining room table and started going through them with Richard, who had volunteered to help. It took us 2 full days, but we found it. Over the past 3 years, approximately $47,000 in fine revenue had been deposited into the HOA accounts, but the corresponding expenses did not add up. Money had been transferred to various accounts, with vague descriptions like consulting fees and administrative costs. When we traced those payments, many went to an LLC registered to Deborah Thompson. "She has been paying herself," Richard said. "This is fraud." We compiled a report and sent it to Patricia, who immediately forwarded it to the state investigator and suggested we also file a police report. I drove to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and spent 2 hours giving a statement to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Anderson was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who took copious notes as I explained everything. "This is definitely something we will look into," she said. HOA fraud cases are tricky because a lot of people think it is just a civil matter, but when you are talking about embezzlement on this scale, it is criminal. What happens next? We will open an investigation. I will need to interview the other board members and get access to the financial records independently. It could take a few weeks. While the police investigation got underway, my generator continued to sit exactly where it had been installed, and I continued to refuse to pay any of the bogus fines. Deborah sent increasingly threatening letters, but the injunction protected me. Then, on a Wednesday morning, I got a call from the county building inspector's office. That was odd since I had not requested any inspections. "Mr. Karlson, this is Inspector Mike Torres with Maricopa County Building Safety. I am calling about your property at 4782 Desert Vista Drive. We received a complaint about your generator installation, and I need to schedule an inspection." "A complaint from who?" The complaint was anonymous, but it claimed the generator was not installed to code and posed a safety hazard. I felt anger rising in my chest. Deborah was now trying to use the county against me. The generator was professionally installed with all proper permits. "But yes, please come inspect it. I want it on record that everything is up to code." We scheduled the inspection for Friday morning. Inspector Torres arrived right on time, a stocky Hispanic man with a clipboard and a no-nonsense attitude. I showed him the generator and provided copies of the installation permit and all the documentation from the electrical contractor. He spent about 30 minutes checking everything, taking measurements, looking at the wiring and reviewing the placement. "Everything looks good here," he said. "Whoever filed the complaint does not know what they are talking about. Your installation is textbook. Proper clearances, correct wiring, permitted and inspected at the time of installation. I will file my report. Thank you." For what it is worth, I think the HOA president filed a false complaint because I am fighting some bogus fines. Torres raised an eyebrow. "HOA president, Deborah Thompson. You know her." Let me just say this is not the first complaint we have received from Fairmont Hills recently, and they all seem to be retaliatory. That catches our attention. While I am here, where is your electrical panel? It is on the side of the house. I walked him around to show him. He examined my panel, nodded, and then asked, "Do you mind if I take a quick look at the community facilities, the clubhouse and pool equipment? I do not control access to those, but I think the clubhouse is open during the day. I will swing by there next. Thanks for your time, Mr. Karlson." I did not think much of it at the time, but 2 days later, Torres called me back. "Mr. Karlson, I wanted to give you a heads up. After inspecting your property, I did an inspection of the HOA common facilities. They have some serious code violations." "What kind of violations?" "Their main electrical panel for the clubhouse is significantly out of code. It is an old panel that should have been replaced years ago. It is overloaded, and it is a fire hazard. I also found issues with their pool equipment wiring. I have issued violation notices, and they have 30 days to make corrections or the facilities will need to be shut down." I felt a grim satisfaction. So the HOA that has been harassing me about my fully compliant generator has major code violations themselves. Appears that way. I am documenting everything. If they have been filing false complaints, that is also something my supervisor will want to know about. I immediately called Patricia to update her, and she was delighted. "This is perfect. We can use this to show a pattern of harassment and hypocrisy." The next HOA board meeting was the following week, and I made sure to attend. The room was more crowded than before. Word had spread about the investigation and the code violations. Deborah looked stressed, her makeup not quite covering the dark circles under her eyes. She called the meeting to order and immediately tried to move to executive session, which would exclude homeowners from the discussion. But Bob Martinez spoke up. "I do not think that is appropriate, Deborah. Homeowners have a right to know what is going on with these violations. This is a legal matter that requires confidentiality," she snapped. "Actually," I said, standing up, "under Arizona law, HOAs can only go into executive session for specific reasons, and general legal matters are not one of them unless they involve pending litigation to which the HOA is a party." "Are we being sued?" Deborah glared at me. "You would know, Mr. Karlson, since you are the one causing all these problems. I am not the one who embezzled $47,000 from the HOA accounts." The room erupted. Homeowners started talking all at once, demanding to know what I was talking about. Deborah tried to gavel the meeting back to order, but people were standing now, voices raised. "That is a slanderous lie," Deborah shouted. "It is not slander if it is true and documented," I replied calmly. "I have bank records showing you have been paying yourself consulting fees through a shell company. The police are investigating." Bob Martinez stood up. "Deborah, is this true?" "Of course not. This man is a troublemaker who refused to follow simple community guidelines, and now he is trying to destroy the HOA. The guidelines you never properly adopted," Sarah Chen called out from the back. "The ones you made up." The third board member, a quiet woman named Margaret Stone, who I had never heard speak, suddenly said, "I would like to see those bank records." "This is not appropriate," Deborah said, but her voice had lost its authority. "I move that we suspend Deborah Thompson from the board pending a full financial audit," Bob said. "I second that motion," Margaret added. "You cannot do that." Deborah was standing now, her hands shaking. "We are both on the board, Deborah. We can call for a vote. All in favor?" Both Bob and Margaret raised their hands. The vote was 2-1, with Deborah obviously voting against. "This meeting is over," Deborah said, gathering her papers. "No, it is not," Bob said firmly. "You are suspended, Deborah. Leave the board table." "Margaret, can you take over as acting president?" Deborah looked around the room, seeing only hostile faces. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The meeting continued for another hour. Margaret and Bob explained that they had been concerned about Deborah's management for a while but felt powerless to stop her. With the homeowners now engaged and demanding answers, they could finally take action. They agreed to hire an independent auditor and to cooperate fully with the police investigation. Over the next several weeks, things moved quickly. The independent audit confirmed what Richard and I had found. The embezzlement was real and extensive. Deborah had been skimming money for at least 3 years, possibly longer. The total amount was closer to $60,000 once all the fraudulent transactions were tracked. Detective Anderson arrested Deborah on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The story made the local news, with headlines about the HOA president who had been stealing from her neighbors. My generator was mentioned prominently as the violation that started the unraveling of her scheme. The HOA's insurance company covered most of the stolen money, and the board voted to rescind all the improper fines Deborah had issued, including mine. They also formally adopted a new set of procedures requiring all enforcement actions to be approved by at least 2 board members and giving homeowners a real appeal process. The code violations at the clubhouse were more expensive to fix. The electrical panel replacement alone cost $12,000, and the pool equipment needed another $8,000 in upgrades. But the work was done properly, and the county signed off on everything. As for Deborah, She eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution. Her lawyer tried to argue for just probation, but the judge was not sympathetic. "You were in a position of trust," the judge said during sentencing. "Your neighbors elected you to manage their community, and you stole from them. You then harassed and retaliated against a homeowner who dared to question your authority. This court takes these violations very seriously." I attended the sentencing hearing, along with several other homeowners who had been targeted by Deborah. Watching her being led away in handcuffs provided a sense of closure I had not realized I needed. Mrs. Patterson apologized to me again a few weeks later, bringing over a homemade apple pie. "I feel terrible that I started all this by complaining about your generator." "You did not start anything, Mrs. Patterson. You were manipulated. Deborah was going to target someone eventually. I am just glad it got stopped." The new board, with Bob as president and Margaret as vice president, turned out to be much more reasonable. They reviewed all the community guidelines and worked with homeowners to update them properly through a legitimate voting process. They also established regular financial reporting and brought in a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations. My generator still sits on the side of my house, properly installed and fully code compliant. Every time I see it, I am reminded that standing up to abuse of power is worth the effort, even when it seems easier to just give in. The broader impact surprised me. After our story got media attention, other HOAs in Arizona started facing more scrutiny. The state legislature even introduced a bill to strengthen homeowner protections and increase penalties for board members who abuse their authority. It was still working its way through committee last I checked, but it had bipartisan support. Sarah Chen joined the HOA board after the next election, bringing a perspective shaped by her own experience with Deborah's harassment. She and Bob made a good team, focused on actually maintaining property values rather than extracting fines from homeowners. Richard Lee helped establish a homeowners' rights group that met quarterly to discuss issues and keep the board accountable. Attendance was usually pretty good, 30 or 40 people, which was way more than had ever shown up before. I learned a lot through the whole experience. I learned that systems depend on participation, that bullies rely on people being too tired or scared to fight back, and that documentation is everything. I also learned that most people are reasonable when given accurate information. They just need someone to take the first step. The financial crimes detective, Anderson, told me later that my case helped her close 3 other HOA fraud investigations. Apparently, there is a whole network of people who work in property management and HOA administration, and word gets around. When other board members saw what happened to Deborah, some of them decided to come clean about their own schemes rather than risk prosecution. The incident also brought the neighborhood together in unexpected ways. People who had barely nodded to each other started actually talking. We discovered we had a lot in common beyond just living on the same streets. Someone organized a block party that summer, the first in anyone's memory, and nearly every household showed up. My relationship with my neighbors improved dramatically. Being known as the guy who stood up to the corrupt HOA president earned me more goodwill than I expected. People would stop me at the mailbox or the grocery store to thank me or share their own HOA horror stories. One thing that surprised me was how many people had just accepted Deborah's authority without question. They assumed that because she was the HOA president, she must know what she was doing and have the right to do what she did. The idea that board members are just volunteers, neighbors who can and should be held accountable, had not really occurred to many of them. The whole situation also made me more politically engaged locally. I started attending city council meetings occasionally, paying attention to county decisions that affected our area. I realized that a lot of problems persist simply because people assume someone else is handling them. Patricia Chambers became a friend through the process. After the criminal case wrapped up, she helped the HOA sue Deborah civilly to recover legal costs. We won that case easily, though Deborah had spent most of the embezzled money and collecting the judgment was difficult. Still, the principle mattered. The most satisfying moment came about 8 months after everything started, when the HOA held its annual meeting. The turnout was massive. Over 100 homeowners showed up. Bob gave a presentation on the HOA's finances, showing how they had recovered from Deborah's theft and established new safeguards. Then Margaret announced that the board was recommending a policy change. Going forward, the architectural committee would have final say on improvement applications, not the board president. The board's role would be limited to financial oversight and major policy decisions. The homeowners voted overwhelmingly in favor. We learned that concentrating too much power in one person's hands is dangerous, Margaret said. This community works better when more people are involved and when there are checks and balances. Someone in the audience started clapping, and soon the whole room joined in. It felt like we had built something better from the rubble of Deborah's corrupt regime. My generator still runs like a charm. I test it monthly, and it has kept my house powered through 2 significant outages since everything went down. Each time, I am grateful I installed it, and grateful I fought back when Deborah tried to bully me into moving it. The electrical panel at the clubhouse, now fully up to code, serves as a reminder of the hypocrisy that brought everything crashing down. Inspector Torres became something of a local hero among the homeowners, and the county used our situation as a case study in training new inspectors about following up on suspicious complaint patterns. I stayed in touch with the other homeowners who had been targeted by Deborah. Sarah and I became good friends, bonding over our shared experience. She introduced me to her book club, and I discovered I enjoyed discussing mysteries and thrillers more than I expected. The irony of us living through our own real-life thriller was not lost on anyone. Richard Lee ended up running for city council the following year. His platform emphasized transparency and accountability in local government, informed directly by what we had experienced with the HOA. He won easily, and he has been a solid advocate for homeowners' rights. The coffee shop where we first all met became our unofficial headquarters. The owner, a woman named Jess who had heard about what we were doing, gave us a permanent corner table and free refills. We still meet there every few months to catch up and make sure the HOA is staying on track. Bob served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down, just as he had planned. His replacement was a younger guy named Frank who worked in IT and brought a data-driven approach to community management. He set up a website where homeowners could track finances in real time and submit maintenance requests. It was a huge improvement. Mrs. Patterson remained apologetic for far longer than necessary, but she also became one of the most active homeowners in holding the board accountable. She attended every meeting and always asked pointed questions about spending. Turns out she had been a paralegal before retirement and knew how to read financial documents better than most. The pool that had been at the center of the code violations got renovated the summer after Deborah's sentencing. The HOA used some of the insurance money and a small special assessment to not just fix the electrical issues, but also resurface the pool and update the landscaping around it. It became a real community gathering spot, especially on hot Arizona evenings. I ended up serving on the architectural committee for a term. It was eye-opening to see how many improvement requests came through and how subjective some of the decisions had to be. But we established clear criteria and documented everything, learning from past mistakes. We approved probably 90% of requests, only pushing back when something genuinely would have looked out of place or violated building codes. The experience taught me that HOAs are not inherently bad. They serve a real purpose in maintaining common areas and preserving property values. The problem comes when power-hungry individuals hijack the system for their own benefit, and when homeowners are too disengaged to notice or care. Looking back now, I am glad I received that first certified letter about my generator. At the time, it felt like a nightmare. The stress, the legal fees, the confrontations, none of it was fun. But it exposed a cancer in our community that needed to be cut out. If I had just paid the fine and moved my generator, Deborah would have continued stealing and bullying unchecked. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not pushed back. How many more homeowners would have been targeted? How much more money would have been stolen? Would the electrical code violations have eventually caused a fire? There is no way to know, but I feel good about the role I played in stopping it. The community is better now. Property values are up, which ironically is what an HOA is supposed to ensure. The common areas are well maintained. Homeowners actually know each other, and the board operates transparently with real oversight. It is not perfect, but it is functional and fair, which is all anyone can really ask for. My story got shared online in various HOA horror story forums, and I received messages from people across the country dealing with similar situations. I tried to respond to as many as I could, offering advice based on what worked for me. The most important thing I told everyone was to document everything and not to fight alone. Find other homeowners who have been affected and work together. Some of those people were successful in fighting back against their own corrupt boards. Others faced more entrenched systems or did not have the smoking gun evidence I had found. But I think knowing that someone else had fought, and one gave them courage to try. Patricia Chambers told me she saw an uptick in HOA dispute cases after our story went public. "You started something," she said. "People are less willing to just accept whatever the board tells them. They are asking questions and demanding accountability. That is good for everyone except the corrupt board members." The state investigation that started with my complaint ended up leading to regulatory changes. The Arizona Department of Real Estate created a new division specifically to handle HOA complaints and conduct audits. It was not perfect. Government agencies rarely are, but it was something. At least homeowners had somewhere to turn besides expensive litigation. Deborah got out of prison after serving 18 months. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to California to live with her daughter. I hoped she learned something from the experience, but I honestly did not care that much. She was no longer my problem. The Fairmont Hills community continued to grow and evolve. New families moved in, and I made a point to welcome them and explain how the HOA actually worked. I did not want anyone to be blindsided like I had been. Most people appreciated the heads up, though some looked at me like I was paranoid for caring so much about HOA politics. 3 years after the generator incident, I was sitting on my back patio on a warm spring evening when I heard a knock at my door. It was a young couple who had just bought the house 2 streets over. They introduced themselves as Mark and Jennifer. "We heard you were the person to talk to about the HOA," Jennifer said. "We want to install solar panels and we are worried about getting approval." I invited them in and spent an hour walking them through the process, sharing copies of the guidelines and explaining how the architectural committee worked. "You should not have any problems," I assured them. "Arizona has strong solar rights laws, and the committee is reasonable now. Just make sure you submit detailed plans and give them time to review." They thanked me profusely and left with a stack of documents. A month later, they stopped by again to tell me their solar panels had been approved without any issues. It felt good to help smooth the path for someone else. Life in Fairmont Hills settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA drama became a story we told at parties, the time we took down the corrupt board president. New residents heard it with wide eyes, while those of us who lived through it could laugh about it in retrospect, even though it had been stressful at the time. My generator still sits on its concrete pad, a quiet monument to the importance of standing up for what is right. It hums to life during its monthly tests, and I smile every time I hear it. That sound represents more than just backup power now. It represents the power of one person refusing to be bullied, of documentation and persistence, of community coming together. The ending was good, better than I could have hoped for when I first opened that certified letter. Justice was served, the community was stronger, and I had learned valuable lessons about civic engagement and personal courage. Sometimes the best outcomes come from the most frustrating beginnings, and sometimes a simple generator can spark a revolution.